You're in for a focused exploration today as we dive into Agile EVM. It's a method that fuses the adaptability of Agile development with the clear-eyed measurement of earned value management.
Hmm.
We're drawing insights from Marcus Levier's 2010 guide, and while our lens is sort of on the fast-moving world of VFX, the core principles here, they really have much broader relevance for, anyone managing complex projects.
Exactly. What we're aiming for is to understand how you can bring a real sense of control to projects that are, just by their nature, dynamic and often subject to shifts in direction.
Right.
Think about Agile, particularly using SCRUM. It's all about those short, iterative work cycles, the sprints, right? With constant feedback built right in.
Yeah.
As Levier highlights, a fundamental idea is to embrace that requirement churn, the fact that what the client wants can and often will evolve. Agile is really designed to be flexible and, learn as you go.
Okay, so at its core, Agile is a team-centric approach. Levier outlines 3 key roles. First, you've got the minder, often called the Scrum Master. Now, this isn't your typical top-down manager.
No, not at all.
Instead, they're a facilitator. Their main job is basically to clear obstacles so the team can concentrate. Interestingly, Levier has a pretty strong opinion on those Scrum Master certification courses.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, suggesting they can sometimes create this layer of management that isn't really, embedded in the work itself.
That's a crucial distinction. The minder's role is about support and enablement, not traditional command and control. Then you have the supervisor, who essentially acts as the voice of the client, the one who sets the priorities for what needs to be done.
The client voice.
And finally, the team itself, a self-organizing group, ideally, no more than about 9 people, with all the diverse skills needed to actually deliver the project. Think of it as like a small, self-sufficient powerhouse.
And what makes this Agile way of working so appealing? Levier points out a few immediate benefits. It's relatively straightforward to pick up and implement, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
It naturally encourages teams to take ownership, and it builds in this constant cycle of self-assessment, which sounds pretty vital for ongoing improvement.
It is, absolutely. Now, let's look at the other side of the coin. Earned value management, or EVM. This is a more, let's say, established project management technique focused on objectively tracking progress.
Okay.
What's powerful about EVM is how it connects 3 key elements: the scope of work, the planned timeline, and the associated costs. By integrating these, EVM gives you a kind of early warning system if things are starting to deviate from the plan.
So if Agile is about being nimble and adaptive, EVM provides the objective measurements to ensure you're still, heading in the right direction.
Precisely.
Our goal today, then, is to really dig into Levier's step-by-step approach to see exactly how this combination, Agile EVM, can bring clarity and a sense of mastery to even the most complex projects, ready to get into those initial steps.
Absolutely. The very first step Levier emphasizes is creating the task list. And this is critical. It needs to be done with the entire team involved.
Right, and this isn't just some casual brainstorming session, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Levier stresses the importance of framing tasks as tangible deliverables.
Yes.
Instead of saying animate the creature, you'd say something like deliver the final creature animation sequence. This makes progress much more concrete and trackable.
Exactly. Measurable.
He also recommends keeping tasks within a 4 to 16 hour estimated effort. This size ensures clarity and allows pretty much any team member to potentially take ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a key shift in mindset Levier points out. Tasks aren't assigned from above. Team members actively sign up for them based on what's a priority and where their skills fit best.
What's fascinating here is the ripple effect that this visible task list creates. Levier highlights 3 fundamental shifts in how the team operates. First, prioritization evolves from, a logistical headache.
Yeah, the usual chaos.
To a clear business decision. It becomes a conscious trade-off between cost and benefit. The loudest voices don't dictate the work. It's about making informed commercial choices.
Exactly. And the second powerful impact Levier notes is around risk responsibility. If someone on the team has a concern, say, a potential technical bottleneck, they can add it as a task to the list.
Interesting.
The supervisor might decide other tasks are more urgent, but if that risk then materializes, Levier argues that the accountability for that accepted risk has effectively shifted to the supervisor. It forces a real upfront discussion about potential problems.
That's smart. It puts the onus on the decision maker. And the third key outcome is the development of clear, just-in-time task definitions. The items at the top of the task list, the ones about to be worked on, need to be sharply defined, self-contained, deliverable units of work.
Right.
They aren't buried in lengthy specifications. They're broken down into small, manageable chunks, staying precisely one step ahead of the team's immediate needs. It's all about focus and immediate actionability.
Okay, so the task list is a collaborative effort focused on deliverables. Step 2, then, is when the supervisor steps in to bring that business perspective and prioritize the list.
Precisely. Levere points out that tasks further down the list are likely to be less well-defined, and there's a real possibility they might not be undertaken at all. The key is to avoid spending excessive time detailing tasks that might ultimately be deemed unnecessary.
And if a task genuinely isn't a good use of resources, the supervisor has the responsibility to communicate that to whoever requested it and, remove it from the list. But if it's a valid request, just not a priority right now, it goes lower down the list, and the requester needs a clear understanding of where it sits in the overall queue.
This concept of the queue is something we all intuitively understand, as Lear mentions. Think about waiting in line for something. What often causes frustration isn't the waiting itself, but the lack of transparency. How long will this take? How many are ahead of me?
Totally. The unknown is the worst part.
By making the task list and its prioritization visible, you significantly reduce that frustration because people understand the process and where their request fits in. It also reinforces the supervisor's authority when decisions are clearly communicated and supported by the overall business strategy.
All right, with the prioritized task list in place, we move to estimation. And this is where Levere introduces a really interesting technique called planning poker.
Yes, planning poker. Instead of estimating tasks in hours or days, the team estimates their relative size using points.
Points, okay.
The real advantage here, Levere argues, is twofold. Firstly, teams find it much easier to make comparative judgments. Is this task, more or less complex than that one?
Easier than guessing exact hours, I bet.
Much. And secondly, it helps to prevent supervisors from treating these initial estimates as rigid time commitments. Points offer a degree of abstraction.
So how does this estimation game actually work? Is it like actual poker?
Sort of. Everyone on the team simultaneously gives a rating to the difficulty or size of a task using a pre-agreed scale, often cards. Then, everyone reveals their rating at the same time.
Ah, so no one's influenced by the senior person's estimate.
Exactly. It encourages independent thinking. If there are significant differences in the ratings, the team briefly discusses the task to understand the different perspectives and negotiate a consensus on a consistent size. Levere emphasizes keeping these discussions focused and brief, just enough to ensure a shared understanding.
And the scale you mentioned, it's not just 1, 2, 3.
Right. He recommends using the first 15 numbers in the Fibonacci sequence, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so on, up to 987.
Fibonacci. Why that?
The idea behind the Fibonacci sequence is that it reflects the increasing uncertainty and effort that often comes with greater complexity. A task rated an 8 isn't just linearly more difficult than a 5. The jump in complexity is more substantial.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not just twice the work. It's potentially exponentially harder.
Exactly. Levere suggests that most tasks will likely fall within the 1 to 21 point range. Think of a 1-point task as something quick and straightforward, while a really ambitious feature might approach the higher end. In VFX, maybe a minor texture tweak is a 1, but creating a whole digital character from scratch could easily be a 21 or more.
Following this point estimation, we get into the concept of a sprint, which Levere defines as a focused production period, typically lasting, 1 to 4 weeks, dedicated to working on the prioritized task list, fixed duration. After a few sprints, the team can begin to track its velocity, which is simply the total number of points they typically complete in a single sprint.
Yeah, how much they get done.
Levere mentions that initially, team members, especially maybe artists in a VFX setting, might tend to underestimate their velocity, which can actually be okay, he says.
Yeah, it can be beneficial, as it allows for the inclusion of some stretched tasks, things you hope to get to but aren't committed.
Right. And it's important to remember, these initial estimates are in points. The more granular breakdown into actual working hours happens later, within the sprint itself.
Correct.
And he even suggests planning poker can optionally be used for estimating earned value and even the relative priority of tasks, which is interesting.
Then there's a crucial, often overlooked step, a final review of the difficulty, priorities, and earned value implications after the initial sizing.
A second pass.
Yes. Once the team has assigned point values to the tasks, Levere strongly recommends that the supervisor and the producer take another look at the entire task list. Seeing the relative size of different features, expressed in points, can often lead to a reevaluation of priorities or even the feasibility of certain requests within the given constraints.
Ah, so you might realize, wow, that feature we thought was small is actually a 13-pointer.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not worth it right now.
Exactly. All task values should be updated to reflect this revised understanding before moving into sprint planning.
That makes perfect sense. A second look with a clearer, quantified understanding of the work involved. Next up is the sprint planning meeting, and Levere emphasizes that everyone on the team across all roles needs to be present. No skipping out.
Absolutely. It's critical. During this meeting, the supervisor presents the task list items that they would like to see completed during the upcoming sprint. The team then considers their collective capacity, their individual skill sets, and collaboratively decides how much of that work they can realistically commit to finishing within the agreed-upon sprint duration.
Which Levere recommends keeping consistent, right? Like always 2 weeks or always 3 weeks.
Yes, consistency helps, usually 2 to 4 weeks for predictability.
And once a sprint has begun, the task list for that specific sprint is essentially locked down, frozen.
Pretty much. No new requirements can be introduced mid-sprint unless an equivalent amount of work is removed.
The trade-off.
And any truly critical new items that absolutely must be added come with a cost. Levere suggests assigning them double the point value to reflect the disruption they cause to the team's focus and flow.
Ouch. Double points. That really reinforces the importance of focused execution during the sprint.
It does. A key part of this sprint planning meeting is thoroughly clarifying the requirements for each task selected for the sprint. The supervisor needs to walk through each item on the sprint task list, explaining it clearly from both a functional perspective, what does it do, and, especially relevant in fields like VFX, a visual perspective, what should it look like?
Ensures everyone's on the same page visually and functionally.
Exactly. This ensures everyone has a shared understanding of the desired outcome.
Following this clarification, the team needs to establish the sprint budget in terms of working hours. How does that work?
Well, it involves calculating the total available working hours for the entire team during the sprint's duration, and then proactively accounting for any planned time off, scheduled meetings, time allocated to other projects, or even anticipated support tasks. Levere stresses that transparency in this calculation is essential for setting realistic expectations.
So you figure out the actual available work time, not just the theoretical maximum.
Right. And this is also the stage where stretch tasks are clearly identified. Levere emphasizes that these are explicitly not expected to be completed within the sprint, and there should be no negative repercussions if they aren't finished.
Okay, so no pressure on the stretch goals.
Completing a stretch task should be viewed as a bonus, an unexpected win. Finally, the team formally commits to the sprint task list if the total points of the selected tasks exceed the team's estimated capacity for the sprint.
Based on their velocity and available hours.
Correct. Then lower priority items are removed until the planned workload is realistic and achievable.
Okay, the planning is complete, commitment made, and it's time to actually start the sprint. Levere reminds us of the important initial step of double-checking those individual task assignments within the sprint.
Just a quick sanity check.
The first key activity for the team is to break down those higher-level sprint requirements into smaller, more manageable subtasks that are still focused on delivering a specific outcome. Again, the emphasis is on what will be delivered, not just what will be done.
Right, the deliverable focus is constant.
And the team needs to agree on a clear definition of done for each of these subtasks. For instance, in VFX, animation complete isn't enough. The definition of done might include specific technical checks, maybe client approvals baked in.
Absolutely. It needs to be unambiguous. And these subtasks are then estimated in terms of hours, ideally aiming for that sweet spot around, say, 4 hours of work. If a subtask looks like it'll take longer than maybe 3 working days, Levere suggests breaking it down even further.
Keep it manageable.
Exactly. He also highlights the significant value of collaborative input at this stage. By asking everyone on the team for their thoughts on how to approach the subtasks, you can often uncover overlooked steps or even simpler, more efficient solutions.
2 heads are better than 1, or 9 heads in this case.
Pretty much.
With the sprint now underway, maintaining clear and consistent communication becomes paramount. Step 8 involves establishing a dedicated collaboration hub, which Levere refers to as a visibility wall or maybe a central whiteboard area.
A physical or virtual space?
This space becomes the focal point for daily stand-up meetings and all team-related discussions, providing an at-a-glance overview of the sprint's progress, often visualizing the task list and who's working on what.
And this leads directly to step 9. No interference, please, with compensation. Livier reiterates that while business needs might occasionally necessitate priority changes during a sprint,
Which happens.
it happens, but these changes should always be balanced by the removal of an equivalent amount of work already planned for the sprint. He also suggests educating clients or stakeholders about the impact of these mid-sprint changes by potentially costing any new, disruptive tasks at double the estimated effort.
Really driving home the cost of disruption again.
Exactly, to truly reflect the cost of lost focus and reprioritization.
Next up is the daily stand-up meeting. Livier is very prescriptive here. It should be brief, strictly capped at 15 minutes.
15 minutes max.
It should happen at the same time and in the same place every day. And it must involve the entire team, including the supervisor and any other actively involved stakeholders.
The format is simple, but incredibly effective. Each team member briefly answers 3 key questions. What did they accomplish since the last stand-up? What are they planning to accomplish before the next stand-up? And crucially, what obstacles or impediments are currently blocking their progress?
The impediments that seems key for the minder role.
Absolutely. This daily check-in keeps everyone synchronized, highlights any potential roadblocks early, and allows the minder to jump in and facilitate quick resolutions.
Following the daily stand-up, step 11 is all about updating the estimated time to complete, or ETC, for each individual task. Livier recommends that each team member takes ownership of updating their own ETCs daily.
Before the stand-up, ideally.
Before the stand-up, okay. He also stresses the importance of visually tracking progress using a burn-down chart. Can you explain that a bit?
Sure. The burn-down chart is usually a graph, right? It tracks the actual time spent on tasks against the estimated time remaining over the duration of the sprint.
So you see the work burning down towards 0, hopefully?
Exactly. In Livier's guide, the example shows an initial estimated time that should ideally trend down to 0 by the end of the sprint, while the actual time spent fluctuates based on the team's progress day by day.
Okay.
Livier emphasizes the value of annotating this chart with any significant events, unexpected delays, maybe moments of acceleration, key lessons learned, essentially creating a continuous visual record of the sprint's journey, and any influencing factors, like a running commentary.
A living post-mortem, almost. And step 12 is deceptively simple, but absolutely critical. Finish on time. No exceptions.
That commitment is key. It reinforces the commitment made during the sprint planning and creates a predictable rhythm for the team and stakeholders.
Now we begin to see the principles of earned value management more explicitly integrated. Step 13 focuses on graphing out the earned value EV versus the planned value PV.
Right. The PV line, as illustrated in the EVM graph in the guide, represents the cumulative value of the work that should have been completed by a given point in time if everything went exactly according to the initial plan, often averaged over the project's duration.
So the ideal plan line.
Livier points out that noticeable spikes and dips in the PV line can correspond to planned major deliverables hitting. The earned value, in contrast, is the actual value of the work that has been completed up to that point.
Okay, so PV is the plan, EV is the reality.
Pretty much. In the example graph provided, you can observe the planned value increasing steadily over the 52 weeks, while the earned value increases in these discrete steps as tasks and deliverables are actually finalized.
Step 14 emphasizes the importance of tracking any outstanding hours, the differences between the initial hour estimates for the subtasks and the actual time it took to complete them.
Yeah, the estimate versus actual.
Livier is very clear that this isn't about assigning blame or micromanaging individuals.
No, definitely not for punishment.
But rather about gaining valuable insights into the team's estimation accuracy over time and identifying any consistent patterns or areas where the team might benefit from improved estimation techniques. The hours for each sprint graph provides a visual representation of this, showing the trends in available hours, hours needed, stretch hours, and actual hours spent across several sprints.
Building on this, step 15 is all about tracking the team's velocity, which, again, is simply the total number of taskless points that the team successfully completed during a single sprint.
How many points they knocked out.
Exactly. Livier again stresses the importance of plotting this data on a graph over multiple sprints to observe the team's output trend. He explains that after approximately, say, 4 sprints, the team's velocity typically starts to stabilize.
It becomes predictable.
It becomes a much more reliable metric for forecasting capacity and planning future sprints more accurately. The points for each sprint graph visually demonstrates this, showing the planned points, the points committed to the sprint, and the actual points completed sprint over sprint.
The sprint then culminates in step 16, the sprint review. Levere strongly advocates for broad attendance at this meeting. The entire development team, reps from other related sprint teams, key business stakeholders, maybe even senior management where appropriate.
Get everyone in the room?
Yeah. The primary focus of the sprint review is to demonstrate the work that has been delivered during the completed sprint, whether it's fully finished or still in progress. Team members showcase their contributions and the tangible outcomes of their efforts.
Show, don't just tell.
Right. And Levere makes a specific point of saying no clapping. The sprint review is not a celebratory demo.
Interesting. No applause.
No applause. It's a formal presentation of progress aimed at gathering valuable feedback and insights from all attendees. He even suggests that for very large teams, the review might need to be broken down into multi-day sessions, or for organizations maybe exceeding 150 people, potentially split into smaller, more focused review units.
Scales it up.
The three main benefits Levere highlights are providing clear visibility into the team's achievements, obtaining regular and direct feedback from stakeholders, and maintaining a strong focus on the sprint's objectives.
Immediately following the sprint review is step 17, the sprint retrospective. Now, this is a dedicated meeting for the core development team and the supervisor. Only wider stakeholders are typically not included here.
More internal focus.
Exactly. The fundamental purpose of the sprint retrospective is to reflect critically on how the just completed sprint unfolded and to proactively identify specific areas where the team can improve its processes, collaboration, and overall effectiveness in future sprints.
Okay, so what happens in the retro?
Levere outlines several key activities for this meeting, including a thorough review of the final burn-down chart to assess performance against the sprint commitment, an analysis of any significant discrepancies in outstanding hours, and a look at the team's velocity to understand output.
Looking at the data.
The team then engages in open discussion about what went well during the sprint and how those successes can be replicated, what aspects could have been better, and the underlying reasons why, and most importantly, collaboratively decides on a few concrete, actionable changes that they will commit to implementing in the very next sprint.
Actionable changes, that's key. Not just complaining.
Exactly. Levere emphasizes that this is a continuous learning process, approached in manageable bite-sized chunks, contrasting it with the often less impactful end-of-project lessons learned reports that are common in more traditional product management methodologies. Those often just sit on a shelf.
Yeah, the dusty binder of lessons learned. And finally, step 19, repeat. Levere succinctly summarizes the wealth of valuable information that is generated through each sprint cycle, direct feedback on the project deliverables, a clear understanding of delivery against commitments, quantifiable data on team velocity, insights into both successes and failures, and concrete planned improvements for the next iteration.
The crucial takeaway here is that the team now takes all of this newly acquired knowledge and immediately applies it to the planning and execution of the subsequent sprint. It's a cycle.
Right.
Levere points out that it typically takes around 3 to 4 sprints for a new team to really gel, establish a consistent rhythm of work, effectively implement process improvements identified in the retrospectives, and for their velocity to become a more stable and predictable metric.
So it takes a bit of time to get into the groove.
It does, and he concludes with a vital reminder. Sprinting highlights problems, it doesn't solve them. The sprint framework provides the structure and the data needed to identify issues.
It surfaces the issues.
And then empowers the team to iteratively address them.
So as you can see, this deep dive into AgileEVM, based on Marcus Levere's guide, provides a really comprehensive and pretty actionable framework for tackling complex projects. It's all about embracing those iterative cycles, establishing clear roles and responsibilities, continuously seeking and incorporating feedback.
That feedback loop.
And using objective measurements to maintain a clear understanding of progress and potential roadblocks.
The real power of AgileEVM, I think, lies in its emphasis on empowering the team to take ownership, fostering a culture of adaptability in the face of inevitable changes, and driving continuous improvement through data-driven insights and regular self-reflection.
And that brings us to our final thought for you today. How might adopting even just a few of these principles, perhaps focusing more intently on defining tasks as deliverable outcomes like we discussed, or maybe implementing regular structured team check-ins like the daily stand-up to identify impediments, how might that transform the way you approach your own projects, regardless of the specific field you're in?
Yeah, what small piece could you try?
We encourage you to take a moment to consider which aspect of AgileEVM resonated most strongly with you and why. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.